Hello, everybody in Lifespan Development. My name is Christopher Gotti, and I'd like to officially welcome you to your very first lecture in your Lifespan Development class. What we'll be doing in this video is going over the general format of the class and some of the helpful hints that I'd like to provide students as they start taking an online course. My guess is that some of you have probably had a few online courses at this point, but I do know there's a couple people that are relatively new to this format, and more importantly, maybe new to what we call asynchronous classes. Courses where even though there's due dates for things, there's no specific times that you have to attend a specific meeting or be somewhere for the class during the semester. I'm hoping through this presentation you'll be a little bit more familiar with what we're going to be doing in this class, and also feel a little bit more comfortable about where we're headed, and that you'll be able to get this material just as well as if you were in an in-person class sitting in front of me right now as I was lecturing. So let's get started. What are we going to focus on in this first class? There's a lot of different places we can go when we try to get students oriented to the material. One of the things I could potentially do in this class is talk about what topics we're going to be discussing throughout the semester. I could break down the different areas of developmental psychology and how researchers have approached them and how each area is unique and worth looking at. But we're going to save that actually for our next video, one that's going to give us sort of a path that we're going to go down so you have a sense of where we're going to be traveling with each module or each week within the class. Instead, what we're going to be doing in this video is, as I mentioned, just giving you a sense of how the class is designed. We'll talk about what it is that's going to happen in each module or week of the class. We'll talk about what things you're going to need to do to complete the class, and also how you're going to be graded. In the end, as I mentioned before, we're also going to spend some time talking about some things that I want to impart upon you as we progress, because navigating in these online classes can be challenging, and having some hints and ideas in mind can definitely be a benefit as you continue throughout this class. So how are we going to break up this class of lifespan development? Well, what I've done for this class is create 15 modules of information. Well, 15 modules for the course in total. 12 of those modules are going to be primarily information based. They are going to consist of presentations, much like the one you're watching right now. Readings are going to be assigned that usually overlap very highly with the presentations. Some type of written assessment to make sure that you're keeping up with things and able to display comprehension of what it was that was covered, and then a chance to interact with other individuals within the class through these things that we call forum discussions. The forum discussions will really just be you having a chance to ask questions or answer questions with classmates in what would be a discussion board like you would have in a regular classroom. I will try my best to not interject in a lot of these discussions, but my aim through this class is when everything is due for these forum discussions, and we'll talk about the details of that a little bit later, I'll kind of add my 2 pieces of information or things that can maybe contribute to the conversation in a useful way without imparting my I don't know if the word authority is right, but in imparting a sense that people need to cater to me or my opinions in these discussions. I really do want these things to be open components to these weekly materials or these module materials that again add up to a big portion of your grade and will consist of what we'll be doing for 12 of the different 15 modules within the class. In addition to these 12 modules where you're going to be learning information, we're going to have 3 additional ones where you're going to be tested on your knowledge of that information. This will consist of 3 different exams, each of them just testing their respective information, and each of them being around 40 to 50 multiple choice questions. Now, most of the focus on these exams will be on the presentation material that I'll be recording, but I do need to warn you that you will have to keep up with the readings to get a super high score on these exams. I also need to warn you, and I will allude to this later on again, that just having slides and a book open when you take these exams is not going to be sufficient. Questions from these exams will be more application based, asking you to explain how things work, or I guess not necessarily explain since it's multiple choice, but identify how things work and also compare and contrast some of the different concepts that we're going through in each of the different modules for this class. But if you're doing well in the written portions and keeping up with things, usually people are pretty successful on the exams as well. So what are these written assignments that I alluded to earlier then? Well, what you're going to see with each written assignment is a different set of questions that try to give me a chance to determine if you understand what it is we're covering, and also give you a chance to review the material and find a way to sort it in your head so you can use it in the future, not only for exams, but once you're done with this class. Sometimes when we go through these modules, you'll be asked to summarize all the content within the class. These can be, I will admit, relatively daunting written assignments, but they're not going to happen every single time. And what I've found over previous classes is that when these specific ones are assigned, students usually, at least the ones that are doing well on the written assignments, do really well on that material when it comes to the exams. Other assignments will ask more poignant questions that try to focus in on specific topics that I want you to be thinking about, or just things that piqued your interest, things that you would like to talk about and display understanding through those discussions. Now, for all of these assignments, it's imperative that you provide very full, detailed responses. You'll often see general suggestions about how long the responses should be, and feel free to go a little bit beyond those suggestions, especially if it takes you a little bit longer than most individuals to get an idea across in writing. I do have very concise people in past semesters that have been able to write stuff that earns full credit going under the suggested limits, but usually writing more tends to be better. And again, if we're talking about things that translate to good scores on the exams, more people write on these things, typically better they do on the multiple choice exams later on. You will be able to, for each and every assignment for this class, submit these online on the class site, and you want to make sure when you submit them that they're submitted correctly. That means no sharing Google Docs on the site, no submitting files that report errors or problems that require me to ask you to resubmit something. And if you do those things, I will unfortunately have to count your submissions as late. I've been around too many times to see students do that when they haven't completed an assignment on time to be able to give people credit for those late submissions. But if you can get those things up, just know that they are run through a plagiarism checker, making sure that you're not using somebody else's words or some other site's material in your responses to the questions. But it'll also allow me to have things in a nice, neat place so I can provide you feedback in a relatively quick period of time. That'll allow you to turn your attention to the next module and really improve upon your responses, or just be able to be confident in your digestion of the previous material moving forward. It's also important to note on this slide that these things do have very specific due dates and times. I mentioned earlier that this is an asynchronous class. That means you won't have to necessarily watch these lectures at a specific day and time. But to keep everybody on task, we can't make everything for this class due in the very last day of the semester. I've tried that actually in past semesters, and it hasn't gone well, with large portions of the class unfortunately falling so far behind that they don't have the ability to finish. So for this class, even though it might seem a little harsh, what I do is I set due dates and times on every assignment, and because these things are submitted on Canvas, anything submitted, even a fraction of a second late, will be counted as late. And there's a late policy on submissions for this class. Now note, you will get credit for submitting late stuff, it's just not full credit. So be very mindful of when things are due. If you go past the due date, don't sweat it, get something in, but know that you will have a fairly substantial deduction on your grade, so you don't want to have that happen too much. If we want to add to this, I'm going to talk about this later. Another thing that you want to be mindful of is not necessarily turning in things early, but just a second or two early. You want to make sure that you get these things in well in advance of the due dates and times. Because what I tend to see is the later things get in, the closer they get to that deadline, the more problems that tend to pop up in the writing. I see more problems popping up in writing. It usually coincides with people feeling rushed or not being able to edit things the way they would if they had more time to work on these posts. So again, you've got for each module where there's written things, different types of questions are going to be asked. The questions will vary from module to module. Each of them will be indicating how many points each component to the assignment is worth. They'll all add up to the same number of points in the end. And these things need to be submitted online with a plagiarism checker and a timer, making sure that there's no issues with these in terms of what you wrote or when you got it in. In terms of how all of this stuff adds up, as I mentioned, those 12 write-ups will be worth the same amount every single time. And in particular, they'll be worth 15 points each. If you multiply 12 by 15, you're going to get to 180 points. And that's, well, exactly 50% of your grade for the class. The other half of your grade for the class is going to be those 60-point exams that we mentioned earlier. Again, they're all multiple choice. They're covering only their respective information. You'll have the entire section and that entire module's worth of time to take the exam. But, in total, add up to a really big portion of your grade. So you want to be well prepared going into those exams, just like you would in any traditional in-person class. And to help students out a little bit, I've made that discussion forum that I talked about earlier an extra credit component to the class. When you participate in these things, by the time the written assignments are due, you will get an extra credit point added to your score at the very end of the course. Please note, I do not add these points onto people's scores until that portion. This allows me to ensure that I'm not disrupting the flow and making students worry about just getting points up, or getting posts up, I guess, for points until the very end of the semester. And for this particular class, we're going to be operating on the typical percentage breakdown that most classes in Peralta or Berkeley City College have, where you're going to have 90% of your grade, or 90% scores or better, resulting in a grade of an A. 80% scores up to 89.99 resulting in a B. In the 70s you'll get a C, and in the 60s you'll get a D. Please also note that I don't do any special rounding or offer any last-second extra credit opportunities. Those exams tend to be a little bit easier because they are online, and those extra credit points add up to a decent chunk. If you do the math, you can see you can actually raise your grade a little bit over 3% by doing those extra credit opportunities every single time. It's definitely enough to help overcome things like late posts or random missed questions on the assignments. So please, make sure you're checking where you're at throughout the semester and know that this scheme that you see here is exactly what's going to be used when final grades are determined at the very end of the class. So some of you might be asking right now, okay, I understand what's in this class is going to entail, what's expected of me, but how do I do well? What is it that I can do to be successful in these online classes that do present their own interesting pitfalls and challenges? And we're speaking about what is required of students in these online, especially asynchronous online classes that maybe you're not thinking about. I wanted to list a few things that really do help students. One of the things that I strongly encourage my students to do in this class, even if the rewards aren't immediate, is to do the readings for this class throughout the entire course. And while you're doing it, take notes on the readings. Mind you, taking notes does not just mean transcribing what's in the book. Same thing goes for watching the videos and taking notes. Taking notes is not just copying down what you see in front of you. Taking notes involves connecting ideas, providing examples of how things work, and finding ways to really explain something even further than what you're seeing in the text or the video. If you do take notes in that particular manner, these things will become invaluable when you're doing your written assignments and when you're studying for your exams. It's also going to help with those issues that students sometimes have when they get flagged for plagiarism. And what they're really just doing is going off their notes, which just so happen to be completely transcribed from slides or from the textbook. As I mentioned also just a few seconds ago, another big thing that you want to do for this class is to make sure you're not only doing the readings, but watching the videos throughout and taking notes. Now, one nice thing with these online classes is you do have the ability to pause them at any point in time. So if you need a snack or to go to the bathroom or just need a mental break, you can just hit the pause button whenever you'd like, do those things, come back and continue with the ability to sort of maintain a focus in a way that maybe students in in-person classes don't really have the opportunity to do. That is, of course, the issue with students sometimes not responding to lecturers the same way if you're looking at a computer screen versus sitting in class. So if you can, again, find ways to take notes, to pause when you just feel the slightest amount of fatigue or distraction, and we can sort of overcome some of those issues and take advantage of the opportunities that these online classes afford people. If we're looking for other things that you can do to be successful, not only in the written assignments but the exams, what I'd love for you to do as you're progressing through this class is try to get the assignments done as soon as you can. I tend to find that students who get posts done a couple days in advance of when they're due tend to be the ones that are the most successful. It's not because if you get things done early you automatically understand stuff better. It's that if you start working on things early, you're going to have sufficient time to slowly work your way through things, to be able to digest stuff, to write a rough draft of your post, sleep on it for a while, and then edit it before putting it up on the class site. And that time to think about things, to process it, will also help not only with your scores on the assignments, but on the exams as well. And this brings me to my last big thing I like to suggest to students taking these online classes. And that's that you have to approach the exams in this class the same way you would approach exams in an in-person class. Yes, you do get to have notes. You get to have your book with you when you're taking exams, and that can be a slight advantage. But these exams are specifically designed in terms of the questions and the amount of time afforded to you to not just reward people for looking up the answers to all the questions. You have to know the material in advance of taking these exams. You might have the time to look up a specific detail here or there if you know where those details are in your notes and your textbook. But if you're going into an exam blind, not knowing entire sections of the material, these exams are going to seem very challenging. If you go in well prepared, they will be much simpler, I think, for most people than in-person exams. At least that's what tends to play out in the average scores that most of these exams have had over traditional semesters. So if you can, again, get yourself started early, treat a lot of this stuff the same way you would as an in-person class, work on things like note-taking and studying, and most of these things should pay off dramatically in these online formats. If you're looking for other things to consider moving forward that aren't necessarily online class oriented in nature, there's a couple things that I always like to bring to the attention of students when they start taking this class. Well, the first things I want you to be mindful of is that this class isn't necessarily one of the easiest classes offered at Peralta. This class is designed to be the equivalence of a course that most people will take during their sophomore or junior year at a four-year college. There's this expectation that most of you taking this class are planning to go to a four-year college or maybe even graduate school and get credit for this because you've learned the information at what would be considered a sophomore or junior level class equivalent. That means that we're going to be covering stuff in a decent amount of depth in comparison to maybe some of the other classes that you've had in the Peralta system. It means that when I'm asking for something in a written assignment and you don't get there, you're not going to get credit for those things that aren't there in those assignments. I know this is probably going to come across as harsh at times. I know some of you are not going to love me by the end of the semester, but I promise, because we're doing this, you can feel confident that if you get through this class, you earn a good grade, that you've earned those things. You've done what would be expected of people at those upper division classes, and that there is really no difference between what you learned and what you did in this class and what somebody at a traditional four-year school would have been required to do in those classes. Now, again, I don't want to keep reiterating this over and over again, but one of the best ways to help yourself with that is to be mindful of the deadlines. Write up a calendar. Have a set of days that you've reserved for this class. I promise, doing those things, avoiding those procrastination moments will really help. Because at some point in the class, we will all have something that comes up, something unexpected that pushes back when we can start working on something or when we can complete something. If you've given yourself a considerable buffer, if you're on top of everything else in the class, these things will not destroy your ability to process information and keep up with stuff in the class. If you're pushing things to the very last minute, those things can be extremely detrimental to not only your grade, but your learning. So please keep those things in mind. And again, this is not just for an online class, it's for all classes in general. Another thing I really want to impart upon you is if you have questions about things, ask. In class, I strongly encourage students to raise their hands if they don't understand something that we're talking about, or if they want to give an example to highlight how something might work and check their knowledge in that way, or if they just want to start a discussion on something that we're covering. I want that same invitation to be extended to you in this online format. That's why the discussion forums are there. That's why I will respond to emails almost instantly when you post them or send them to me. And these questions that you have are really critical elements to developing an understanding of the material and being successful in this class. So please, if you need help with the material and processing it, ask me questions and ask me early. So it's not about, well, how can I make up this thing I lost, but instead, how can I understand this thing that I'm interested in better so I can write a good post or do well on the exam. Another thing that's really important in this class is that you find applications to what it is we're discussing. Personally, I feel like this is a very easy thing in a lifespan class. Everything that we cover here has applications to it. But I can appreciate that this is sometimes challenging when you go through a course with a lot of material. Having the thought process of trying to find a way to connect each and everything we're covering to your own life or some experience can be a little exhausting at times. But if you're approaching things with that mindset often, maybe not every time, but often, that can really help. It can really help with retention of information, and it can make this class significantly more enjoyable. So please, do your best to keep this thing and all these other things in mind, and I promise you will get a lot out of this class, and you'll hopefully enjoy a lot of the things that we're going throughout this semester. All right. It's going to mark the end of this first lecture. Congrats, you made it through. I promise we're going to give you a little bit more specific information about what this class is going to entail in our next lecture when we talk about specific areas that we'll be studying and what developmental psychology is all about. But hopefully after this lecture, you have a better lay of the land and you might be a little motivated to look through the syllabus, review a couple things, and make sure that you're really ready to go moving forward. So thank you very much for making it through this first video. I hope to have many of you hearing my voice soon, and if you've got questions along the way, again, don't hesitate to reach out. Take care all, and again, hopefully I'll see you soon.